about 7 minutes, so I think, Siobhan, do you think we might
Yeah, we've got
start
a good number here.
So welcome to everybody who's already come into the session. We've had 70 people register themselves, so we expect possibly quite a lot more to come in during the introduction. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to give you some housekeeping points first, and then to introduce our session this evening, which we build as Act Now to defend Peckham's heritage. This is about the impact that the planning application from Berkeley Homes, the developer for the Aylsham Centre site, has on the impact has on the heritage in the centre of Peckham. We hope through this event to explain that, and we can come back to it during the discussion, explain what we mean by Act Now. We probably have until early spring to get comments into the council about it, but it is always important, if what we have made up our minds about what we want to say, to get them in as quickly as possible after that, because there's no knowing what the council might do. But they have given us assurances that it's unlikely to come to the planning committee before next spring, which we're taking for the moment as potentially March, but it might actually be after that. So that's the timescale we're working to. So first, some housekeeping. There are 3 technical Zoom points that I've already mentioned, but some people have come in since I mentioned them. You will need to be able to find the buttons for 3 things: the chat box, muting, and raising your yellow hand. Is there anyone currently listening who can't find one of those now? Because this will be a good moment to try to explain it. So here's a challenge: either unmute yourself and say that you can't find something, or put up your yellow hand, which will give you a bit of practice in putting up the yellow hand if you haven't already done that. Is everybody okay then? Somebody called P. Who's P? You need to unmute yourself. No, the yellow hand is gone. So maybe he or she was just checking it. So that's great. Thank you. If during the session you have difficulty with any of these, please say so in the chat box and someone will be able to respond. And we'd like to mute yourself when we start, when I finish this introduction. As you heard on your way in, the session is being recorded so we can share it afterwards on the website. And as I've mentioned to some already, please share in the chat, if you wish, your name, your location, and your interest in tonight's session. I'm going to introduce 2 of us now, Siobhan and myself, who are facilitating this session. Siobhan McCarthy, like myself, is a local resident and a member of Peckham Heritage and ACA, which is the umbrella Aylsham Community Action Campaign. Siobhan's looking after the Zoom and to remind us of anything we may forget this evening. Siobhan, can you say hello and just wave your hand so everybody knows who you are?
Oh, hi. I was born and raised in Peckham, and nice to meet you all. And slightly frozen, so I cannot wave, but hello.
Thanks, Siobhan. And so my name is Eileen Conn, and I've lived in Peckham for over 50 years. As some of you know, I've been engaged in community action for a long time locally, and over the last 20 years, in particular with Peckham Vision. I want at this moment to just give thanks to Claire Hegarty, who is not able to be with us tonight, very unfortunately, because she was a really important part of planning for this session, but she's not able to come tonight. But she's been a really vital part of our teamwork over the last 8 years, in starting in the Townscape Heritage Initiative, which a part of which was something called the Peckham Heritage Regeneration Partnership, which was local people working with some council officers on the THI and community engagement in the planning process around it. And Claire unfortunately hasn't come, but she's been an inspiration and is still working with us after the PHRP has ended. She was the independent chair of that, appointed by the council, and so she has been very influential and particularly in coordinating the production of the book that the PHRP and some of those of us who are present tonight produced and launched on the 1st of March this year, called Peckham's Heritage, Past, Present and Future, which is also a very significant sort of underpinning for the kinds of things we'll be talking about tonight, about what is heritage and what is the meaning of it and what's its value. And that book is on sale in a number of places, which we can talk about at the end, in Peckham locally as well as by post. So thank you very much to Claire, who's not able to be with us tonight. So at this point, Siobhan, can you share the screen, the program on the screen?
Hopefully everyone can see that.
Not yet. Now it's up. Can you raise it a bit? Oh, it's all right. Can everybody see that? Put your hand up if you can't. So it's in three main parts. First of all, we have a couple of talks, and then we have a participative part after that. And then we have a short closing section. So the first part are the two talks by Benedicto Luni and Andrea Vasolchin, both of whom live in Peckham and have lived here for some time, both of whom are architects, and they are therefore very well qualified to give us some thoughts this evening about what they think are the issues about heritage and about the impact of the Aylsham planning application. So they're very well qualified. So what I'm going to do now is actually hand over to Benny for you to give the first talk on. You have titled your talk we've lost the agenda on the screen, but Aylsham proposals and historic Peckham. Ouch! Over to you, Benny.
Thanks very much, Eileen. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Start at the beginning. Okay, so we thought one way to get this conversation started and to include as many people as possible is to tell a little bit of a story about this key site in the heart of Peckham. All of us involved in the Aylsham kind of community campaign recognize the importance of developing this mighty site in the heart of Peckham Town Centre. And so I think we're all looking forward to something really special happening here, but we fear that this might not be the, how do I say, the kindest scheme for Peckham or something that fits in terribly well with the distinct character of the neighborhood here. And we wonder if something that the local authority could go back to the developers, Berkeley Homes, who are very ambitious capitalist developers, and try to force them to come up with something that sits with the townscape of Peckham, which is pretty low on the whole, and something that creates a really wonderful work of architecture, which we're afraid that as this has come together so quickly this last year, and it's such an enormous site, you know, there's 850 plus flats here, that the designers haven't had a chance to mature and come up with a really decent scheme. And because the commercial imperatives are so uppermost in the mind of the developers, we feel that the architects and the designers of the site here haven't had a chance to do something really wonderful. And naturally, as people passionate about Peckham, we want something amazing to happen here, not something that's half-baked or prematurely sent in our direction. And so it's a really big change. And this aerial photograph here shows how dense this proposal is. 850 plus flats with buildings that rise from 5 to 10 to 20 stories, and with not a lot of space in between them. And so while we think a tall building could work really well on this site, we're wondering if so dense, a forest of buildings is the right thing for this wonderful site that really can make sure that Peckham is healthy, dense, and populous going forward. Peckham has been around for a long time. It's first mentioned in the early medieval period, And through the Renaissance times, a kind of hamlet and then a village developed where Rye Lane meets the Peckham High Street. And so the Aylsham site is right in the village heart and has been in the heart of Peckham since anybody can possibly remember, mentioned in the Domesday Book almost 1,000 years ago. And that's one of the things we don't think the developers really kind of get, nor do they particularly have experience building big, dense developments right on top of, hard by, a low-scale, delicate, historic townscape. So if we look at this map from the 1820s, we can see marked out in red the Aylsham development site. The now, of course, all know as the Arcade, Morrison's, and the big car park, which is obviously a waste of space. There's something much better could happen there. And when this map was drawn in the 1820s, we can see some of the main topographic features. There was a big brick field, more or less where the car park is now. We can see the River Peck cheerfully kind of meandered down the eastern part of the town center with a great big pond, no doubt, where the brick was excavated for many generations there. We can also see by the 1820s that the west side of Rye Lane, or what was then known as South Street, as it headed south towards the hill and out towards Croydon Way, was developed with quite big Georgian houses, some of which survive behind the present shops. If you look up above the shop fronts, you can see these lovely early 19th century brick buildings. But the east side of Rye Lane was generally developed much later, in the second half of the 19th century. And so you see there, don't have the front gardens that were built over with the various shops, Boots and the trade shop, which were big shops that were built over the ground level and the gardens. We can also see by the 1820s, the Surrey Canal had made its way from the big Surrey docks on the river, nosing the Peckham branch, nosing into the town center. And we can see quite a lot of shops and things going on the high street. And this was particularly kind of highlighted and developed after the construction of Vauxhall Bridge, which for the first time meant that Peckham was on the main route heading from the west end of London down to Rochester and Chatham and Canterbury and Dover, etc. And so the tempo began to pick up in the development of Peckham with the construction of the Westminster and the Vauxhall bridges in the late 18th and early 19th century. Here, this same map shows that outside of that nucleus of Peckham, right where Rye Lane meets the High Street and Peckham Hill Street runs north, it was all fields. Particularly, folks, the Brickfield, where the Morrison's car park is, but generally market gardens, places to grow vegetables and grain to serve the hungry kind of markets of central London. And then, so if we look in detail, we can find quite some interesting things. And we can also find this kind of slightly crooked shape, which the department store later, Jones Higgins, wonderfully exploited by building a big kind of clock tower there, as it forms a kind of interesting axial view as you approach this village center of Peckham, or what was becoming Peckham Town Center by the 1830s and 40s, from quite a distant view from Camberwell. And what did it look like? It looked like fairly low-rise buildings of 2, 3, perhaps 4 stories. And many of the buildings were timber frame buildings, as they were just outside of the city boundaries of London in the 18th century, and so didn't meet the same building regulations that forced all the buildings in the center of London to be faced in brick. And so here in this cheerful Surrey village, a mile or two south of London Bridge, some of the buildings were made from timber with clay-tiled roofs. And one of the amazing things that come through the history and the archives in Peckham is this fabulous view of the south side of the Peckham High Street, drawn, as you can see, from the costumes of the people in the early 19th century, in about 1820 or so. And you can see even by then, some of the front gardens were being built over with the shop there on the left-hand side. And so miraculously, some of these buildings still survive at 66 to 58 Peckham High Street on the south side, opposite the Peckham Arch, looking pretty doughty there, surviving into the 1930s, 1940s. And even today, you can still see a group of them survive, one of which is thankfully listed as a kind of powerful reminder of what Peckham was like in the 18th century when it was a Surrey village. And this narrative has been wonderfully told in this important book about the architecture of London, The Small House in 18th Century London, which celebrates these amazing survivors, timber framed with clay tiled roofs and attractive timber dormers, telling the story of these 18th century artisans and house shops and houses for all sorts of different people made out of traditional or what we sometimes call vernacular materials that linked Peckham to the countryside and to Surrey and Sussex architectures. You can see a bit of that in Basing House. That's where the Lidl car park is now. That's gone. But amazingly, another group of these timber frame houses survive also on the south side of the high street, a little bit to the east of Peckham Hill Street. And these old shops and houses have been spectacularly restored as a part of the Peckham Townscape Heritage Initiative, which was kind of initiated by Eileen, a team from Peckham Vision, the Peckham Society, which saw Southwark Council getting together with the Heritage Lottery Fund to try to kind of understand, to research, and to put back together some of this remarkable surviving townscape from when Peckham was a village at this threshold between city and countryside, using kind of rural materials like pan-tiled roofs and timber frames, etc. Here we can see how the shoe shop's been wonderfully restored, and an old 18th century house and shop has been kind of reinvented or redreamed up at 100 Peckham High Street, beautifully detailed by my friend Jan Katijn Architects. So really amazing survivors. But now if we look at the scheme with the New Elsham's proposal, it gets hit spectacularly hard with this giant wall of new architecture that rises up hard behind these old diminutive buildings. We recognize that something dense is inevitably going to happen on this site, but we wonder about the deployment of these big dense buildings. And we think probably 850 or 870 flats kind of crushes a lot of these wonderful historic buildings that the council have put so much effort into restoring. And so here we can see kind of the gateway view into Peckham from the north, heading south along Peckham Hill Street, the old canal landscape to the right-hand side, the yellow brick estate to the left-hand side. And at the end, you can see the old 18th century houses, but very much overwhelmed by 870 flats. We think probably 500 flats is a much better number to kind of ventilate Peckham. Moving forward, what we find is one of the parts of Peckham that's really most impacted by this scheme is the north part of Peckham, the part of Peckham that I live in, our studio is at, and where I'm speaking to you from now. And so if we look on the left-hand side of what the view beside the Peckham Library is, a good deal of sky, the arch, and then the proposed view, these images are all from the planning application, which you can find online, in particular the environmental impact statement that addresses heritage matters. And so we were fascinated to work through these and try to understand how things are going to change. So really quite a lot coming our way. And while there's a kind of harmony of materials in Peckham, the tiled roofs, the slate roofs, the brick and the lovely Edwardian red brick buildings, and the lovely Georgian and earlier Victorian London brick buildings, this kind of seems to jar a bit, which gives us the strong kind of feeling that this scheme hasn't quite arrived yet. And it's perhaps premature to put forward this ambitious planning application when it doesn't seem to really kind of fit with the local townscape, as I think you all can see. And that's one of the things we wanted to underline with this gathering this evening. So not only is the Rye Lane conservation area significantly affected by this, but we can also see the Peckham Hill Street conservation area that leads north out of Peckham is significantly impacted too. So going back to the Elsham site, by the mid-19th century, by the 1870s, we can see things are beginning to, the tempo is really picking up in Peckham. And what we can see is the railways to the south at the very bottom of this image here have arrived in the 1860s. Still, the west side or the east side of Rye Lane is undeveloped, but the west side is pretty well developed. And we can also see north of the High Street, the canal, and the streets heading north are all kind of laid out with houses built from the 1820s, 30s onwards. But the main Elsham site itself is still quite open, with one of the handful of big patrician houses, Avenue House, situated right in the middle of it. Another curious thing that could have been found on the Elsham site, more or less where the car park is now, back in the early 19th century, was this incredible building called Heaton's Folly, church-like, with this wonderful tower with neat little classical coins and a viewpoint at the top. Peckham was noted for these magnificent views of the city of London, and perhaps in Heaton's Folly, he was capturing these views with this kind of observation point here, as it's flat pretty much towards the river. And Peckham was noted capturing these wonderful views of the hills of the city of London with all of Wren's towers, of course, surmounted by St. Paul's Cathedral and the 50 other city churches by Wren and the Office of Works, laid out on Cornhill and Ludgate Hill. So here the railway arrives in 1865, and that really initiates a great deal of development into these market gardens and fields that characterize the area north and south and east and west of Rye Lane. And by the turn of the last century, this picture here is probably from about 1910 or so, we can see that shops had become the main deal on Rye Lane, and to a lesser extent the High Street, with the mighty Jones and Higgins at the south end of the street. So here we can see how the scale of Peckham rose in these built in 1893, this magnificent Jones and Higgins for this one of 6 big department stores on Rye Lane, perhaps the poshest of them, with this spectacular clock tower designed by the leading architects of the late 19th century in Southwark, Henry Jarvis and Son, who built also the Walworth Town Hall, so wonderfully restored recently, Borough Market, and numerous churches across Southwark. And there you can see it's modeled on the famous Torre Orologio in Piazza San Marco in Venice. It's very much almost directly based on it, which is wonderfully borne out in the research that Nancy has been doing on Jarvis and Son and his sketches in his tour to Venice in the 1870s. Coming further on in the 19th century, in the 1880s, here we can see the Booth sort of social or Booth's poverty map, showing fairly prosperous shopkeepers and houses marked in red, with the artisan folk in the typically blue buildings clustered around the hinterland of the High Street to the north part of Rye Lane. Quite a lot of buildings survive from this period, the mid-19th century, and they've also featured in this amazing Townscape Heritage Initiative. Here we can see the restored Red Bull, one of the other shops on the High Street, the former Sally O'Brien's public house, wonderfully, with many of its details restored, and the tiles and the decoration wonderfully revealed on the Greyhound pub. And so it was a great time for Peckham's architecture, and the Townscape Heritage Initiative has really underlined that most wonderfully, a totally successful scheme from Southwark and the Heritage Lottery Fund. And so here are some of the impacts of the new scheme. We can see these quite burly rectilinear buildings kind of rising up on the right-hand side of this photograph, happily kind of pulled back away from the clock tower, but still very dense and very prominently seen from people coming into Peckham, not only from the north, but from the west too. And there, from the opposite side, we can really see how this mass of high density housing rises towards the eastern side, up to about 20 stories. Analyzing this site here, we wonder perhaps a taller building might be better if it could ventilate the site and bring more air into the site. And then if we look going south along Rye Lane, we can see the present Elsham Centre is completely removed and a 7-story block of flats is built. Now, we mustn't forget that Rye Lane was the old country lane heading south from this hamlet in the Renaissance period, and it's very narrow. And so we wonder, although it's looking quite cheerful and sunny in the developer's image here, we wonder if it might be a bit oppressive, rising hard on the pavement of this old lane, such a big and dense building. In the Second World War, the Jones and Higgins building was partly damaged by significant bombing to the east and to the south of this site here. And we can see that the tower was truncated and a lot of the Victorian detail was removed from the upper parts of this building. We wonder if in the new Elsham scheme, could it be a chance to have some of the developers kind of looking at restoring some of the parts of this lost building? One of my favorite things is this fabulous Baroque gable that is truncated now. If we can see, it's the entire lower kind of 2/3 of it there today. But could we dream about having some of this richness of our historic detail restored? Another important part of the townscape around this Elsham proposal is the housing on the north side of the Peckham High Street. Here, the Goldsmith estate built by the London County Council architects in the interwar period. It's really quite handsome, made of a combination of yellow buff brick and red rubber bricks in the kind of fashionable Wren Revival style of the early 20th century. Note the keystones over the windows and those mighty chimneys and those fabulous clay tile roofs, hinting that this is kind of before the time of central heating and very much gleefully using traditional London materials. In fact, it's our version of Hampton Court. Here you can see Wren's spectacular park-facing facade of Hampton Court, very much the inspiration in this Wren Revival building in the heart of our town centre. Or does it perhaps reference the lost Vanbrugh House that was more or less where the little car park is now, sadly lost, built by one of the most flamboyant Baroque architects? Certainly, there was a big Baroque revival in the years around 1910, 1920, when this building was built. So here we can see the Goldsmith estate, strong, confident classical architecture with lovely classical details, with the central passageway beckoning to an enormous green space that you can see behind. And so if we look at some of the housing in Peckham Town Centre, we can see it balances density with some really decent spaces for people, a generous kind of green square in the heart of this Goldsmith estate, the lovely tones of the buff bricks, the red rubber bricks, and these generous tiled roofs. Perhaps these are the materials that might be considered for this new Peckham development rather than the rather strident pinks and yellows that we see in the developers' images. Even the bin stores have lovely classical arches over the doorways with handsome Portland stone springing points and keystones. Maybe something in traditional architecture has something to say for this development here proposed in Peckham Town Centre. What the developers' images show these curious strident colors, pink, yellow, orange, and green. Well, color is amazing in architecture. I think we all recognize that. And Peckham is vibrant, but does it mean pink buildings? I wonder. It certainly, we should be trying to ask for something that fits in with the townscape of Peckham. The Second World War was not kind to Peckham Town Centre. We can see not only the depredations of the Blitz and later bombings, famously a terrible bomb in 1943 on the corner of Hanover Park. And then at the very end of the war, in 1944, Peckham, basically 30 missiles fall on Peckham in 2 months in June and July 1944, at the end of the Second World War, with a V2 missile crashing into the high street to the top of the screen image, and then 2 V1 rockets, one on McCarroll Road and one a little bit further south. So really a terrible time for Peckham throughout the Second World War, and particularly in the sort of violent end of the war in the summer of 1944. And this aerial photograph really shows those changes. You can see by the mid-1940s, they had cleared the sites to the north of Peckham High Street, and where Flamborough House is now is a big kind of cleared bomb site, as is McCarroll Road. Here we can see a powerful painting showing the destruction on McCarroll Road, where sadly 11 people were killed when this V1 violently crashed into the site in the summer of 1944. And here, a little bit earlier, the depredations of a bomb in 1943, strangely after the Blitz, that's obviously where Primark is now, at the corner of Hanover Park and Rye Lane. And so pretty tough times. And that is marked in the new housing that you see. These buildings, this extension of the Goldsmith estate to the south, a big block Dunstall House that now faces the Peckham High Street as it metamorphoses into the Queen's Road. But if we look at the architecture, it's actually quite beautifully detailed. Again, with the mellow tones of the clay-tiled roof, these lovely big chimneys and quite elaborate pattern brick detailing. And on the other side, the south side of the high street, we can see Flamborough House, where this V1 rocket crashed in to flatten the Victorian townscape that used to be there. So if you look at the bomb damage maps, of course, they make very clear why these new 50s buildings were introduced immediately after the war. And another thing that was on the Aylsham site was the big bus garage designed by the uber cool Art Deco architects Wallace Gilbert and Partners in the early 50s, at the same time as the mighty Festival Hall was built on the Thames. So let's look briefly at this architecture. It's medium rise, it's quite well ventilated, there's big public spaces for the residents and for the Peckham folk as they filter through these sites here. And we can see the materials are really lovely here, Flemish bond brickwork and really high quality facing brick, circular windows, tiled roofs. And even the Clifton estate, just to the east, also on bomb sites, built a little bit later by the LCC, or the Greater London Council Architects Department in the 1960s and early 70s. Again, we can see a rich palette of materials, lovely buff brick, some concrete work, and generous planting. And so I don't think any of us are anti kind of tall buildings on this site, but could they be well ventilated with decent green spaces that we find in the housing states of Peckham surrounding the Aylsham site? Really pretty decent, humane architecture. Finally, the last couple of slides I show look at the south side of the Aylsham site. Here, one of the other fabulous survivors from Jones and Higgins department store, amazing piece of work by the younger Jarvis, this kind of fusion of Indian and Gothic and classical architecture with a later bank frontage built in the 1930s. So a mixture of the 1890s with this interwar 1930s bank frontage added a bit later, but really strong, confident classical architecture. Here we can see with the developer's proposal of buildings pushing up quite close around these buildings. Well, we're expecting something dense here, but really not quite as dense as this. One of the nicest spaces in the existing Aylsham Centre is the arcade, which on these photographs I took this afternoon on a chilly autumn day, lots of people hanging around, shopping, doing their kind of thing. And it seems kind of unfortunate that the new Aylsham proposal doesn't give back an arcade too, which I think is probably the nicest part of the 1980s postmodernist development here. I made this sketch for the area characterization study meeting a couple of months ago. And one of the things they asked us what your favorite thing about Peckham was. And one of my favorite things is the way there are all these wonderful public spaces, arcades and shops, and inventive kind of reuse and dense use of these sites off Rye Lane, these kind of unexpected things you encounter, Copeland Park or the Peckham Arcade, etc. And so I wonder, that's one of the things that's really Peckham, and that seems to be kind of missing from this new proposal. And so I've been trying to encourage the developers to look at wonderful arcades, not very effectively, as you can see. Here, reminding folk about the amazing Leadenhall Arcade, or, oh my God, the beautiful Royal Arcade in Norwich. It's a great British building type and something that could really make something better about this dense development. And then finally, we can see the impact on the big views looking north from here, the multi-story car park, the spectacular view of the panorama of London that we enjoy in the summer times up in Bold Tenancy, or really any time if you go to the Peckham levels, entirely kind of truncated by this massive development, basically, which, as you can see, steps up from 6 or 7 stories to the west, all the way up to like 20 stories to the east. And yeah, so pretty strong stuff. And then this kind of architecture that seems alien, I suppose. I mean, we must all kind of weigh in about this, but it just doesn't seem to fit with the kind of lovely tones and details of Peckham's townscape. And so the last slide is these here, which show again how there's a kind of grain to Peckham. There's a kind of an amount of space, and this is all pushed together very tightly, very abruptly. And so while Peckham has grown quite elegantly and grown quite seriously and vigorously over hundreds of years, we wonder if this sort of density is going to fit well with the Peckham that we all kind of know and love. And finally, a sketch that I made from the roof of Bold Tenancy that shows there are buildings of real interest all around Rye Lane and all around the Aylsham site. And does this new proposal kind of recognize that or capture what is wonderful about Peckham? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Benny. That's a wonderful overview of why a lot of us are really stimulated into protecting Peckham's heritage for the future generations, which we've enjoyed ourselves, and know that it's actually been a view that that particular view has been in English literature for several centuries, since Daniel Defoe said it was the best view in the British Isles, the very same view which we are grateful to Derek Kinraid, the late Derek Kinraid, for identifying for us when we were campaigning to save the Peckham multi-story car park from demolition because of its reuse potential, which is now well in evidence. Anyway, over to you, Andrea, for your short talk on learning from Peckham, and then we'll go into questions and answers. And I know that Belinda has already put one question in the chat for that. So over to you, Andrea. Is there anything you would like to about yourself to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm just sharing my screen. I hope you can see full screen.
We can just see learning from Peckham at the moment.
Yeah, it's full screen, right?
Just yes, full screen, but
Yeah,
just the
perfect.
words. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm a local Peckham resident for the last almost 8 years, and I've been a resident in Southern Council for over a decade. So yeah, very pleased to have this short addition to Benny's wonderful talk tonight. I think if I can start this short presentation with a couple of things to almost plant the seeds in your mind, would be what does heritage would look like in 50 years or more? As Benny alluded in his talk, there are many things we've been gifted from centuries ago that still survive today and that lighten our days and our experience of walking down Peckham. And as you have seen, the proposal that we currently see from Berkeley Homes, which is this very dense, over 850 units proposal, it's not producing the same effect. But I'd like to have a short, in a way, run through through some examples of schemes in Peckham or around Peckham, Camberwell, Queen's Road, uh, to show what other examples have been built in Southwark, London Borough of Southwark recently. And this continues from an event Benny and I did for Open House in September. So as you can see, yeah, there are a few things. The second thing I would like to discuss about would be this plot ratio and plot coverage. And I know it can get a bit technical, but what I'm trying to nuance through these examples we will see later is that the Berkeley Home Scheme currently occupies almost all the plot coverage, leaving very little public realm and green space in between, whilst also pushing the plot ratio really high. So the highest element is reaching 20-story towers. So from a heritage perspective, understanding this richness that we have in Peckham, surrounding it at least on two sides, the question is what we are left with. So if we quickly do a walkthrough, we'll start with Peckham Place, which is situated northeast of Aylsham Centre. It's been designed by Gestico and Wows. Previous use has been residential on site, and currently the height is up to 8-story high. What is very important to understand in this plot ratio and plot coverage as well is that these buildings, you might like them or not, it is in a way designed very close to a busy road. So all the design, the facade elements have this space in between for you to be able to take in the design. Whereas, yeah, other examples we will look at are placed in a much more, let's say, sensitive area. So there is no heritage element in front of this development. This is the previous scheme that has been on site, that has been demolished way before the new scheme was built. And you can see it's this kind of modernist slab structure. Currently, what we see are these 3 blocks, and we see elements of greenery, inner courtyards, whilst also allowing for a public realm to be built in between the 3 blocks. And it is connecting quite nicely with the part of the old development at the back side as well. So the conclusion of this short run through on the northeast side of Peckham at Peckham Place is that you can allow taller elements and you can allow denser elements, but you need to have, for example, this busier road, like two-way carriage on both sides to allow for these elements to sit in. And also there is no heritage in front of it, like no conservation area or designated assets. And you can see here some views from the streets that almost nuance the up to 8-story high elements, and behind is the Whitcomb Tower in Clifton Estate as well. What I want to caveat as well is that by no means any of these examples are presented as a perfect integrated design. However, there are very good elements from these schemes that could be taken forward. And as Benny said, currently we don't see that at the Aylsham proposal yet. We see a very early, a very early trial. The second proposal we are looking, and it's something we stopped at our open house event, is the Mellon Road by Adam Khan and Levitt Bernstein. The height is up to 5 stories. Previously, it has been a green space. I will leave that story aside, but it's been built very sensitively, in a way, integrating with some of the elements on site, allowing for a really playful public realm as well. So you can see over here a bit pixelated the image, but there are very nice front of house elevations and public realm to allow for playfulness, play on the way for children, and also some inner courtyards. Here you can see some images, and you can see the 4-story element with further story added at the back in a different materiality. It's very nicely detailed. The brick as well, you can feel that the height and the density is trying to be in a way muted down by allowing for this wide glazed bricks on the top corner, and then nuancing that and celebrating it at the back side in the courtyard as well, where you see this play on the way. So what we feel from looking at this scheme is that you feel attention to details and also generosity, both in terms of the public realm proposal, but in terms of the facade treatment as well. So it's quite nuanced, and there is use of color, but it is muted in some way to allow that celebration. And these are some sketches from that scheme. Another scheme we discussed to include is the Whitcomb Tower, part of the Clifton estate, and you can see it. I've included a screenshot, an aerial screenshot here. I've tried to look for the history, sorry, very pixelated image, but it's been before, like terraced housing on site. Benny knows the history much better than I do. The point is that you have this point block tower, which is this modernist concept where you allow lower elements to hug the bigger density. So you still allow for the generosity in the public realm, while supporting a higher density of units in there. So you can see here an aerial view of the Clifton Tower, part of the of the Whitcomb Tower, part of the Clifton estate, and the lower slabs as well. Here you can see the greenery that is in a way supporting this breathing space in between the taller elements and the lower elements. So yeah, you have the point block tower, the modernist slabs, and then all the green space in between. Another scheme I decided to include is something very close to where I live. It's the Nunhead Green by AOC. And I think this is quite an interesting scheme, even though it's very low density, to understand how the architect has been playful in interpreting the heritage on site. So it's been used before as a former nursery, which has been demolished, and it's been proposed much denser residential use with both social units and units for private use. And also there is a huge community center at the corner, which is very successful. However, what's very interesting, what's been done on this plan, you can see, if you can see my cursor, there are very old buildings over here, almhouses, where the architects have interpreted some of the heritage and some of the elements from this building into proposing the new elements. Even though, again, I will say that again, this is not a perfect recipe. We are just trying to pinpoint some good elements from these schemes. But I do think it is very successful in trying to acknowledge the heritage that is on site in a contemporary way, while still allowing for a density. So you can see again the detailed brick facade, all this pointed elevation in 3D as well, and the different use of color, which is quite muted and subtle, but equally it makes it encloses the Nunhead Green itself in a quite successful way. And the last scheme we are looking at is Peckham Road by Peter Barber. I remember when this was first built on site, my reaction to it from the old petrol station, it felt very much like in your eyes. However, cycling past it almost every day, I got very much used to it and to appreciate this detailed massing and pushing back elements, bringing forward elements, and just this playfulness that I think, as Benny very eloquently suggested in his talk, that Peckham has these amazing jewels in all parts of Peckham next to the Aylsham Centre. And I think this is something we would be keen to see as well in the new proposal. So previously it has been used as a petrol station, this site. Some of you might remember next to it was as well a recycling part. And yeah, there are elements up to 7 stories, I think. Yes, 8 stories maybe. No, 7 stories, I think, with the ground floor, possibly. Yeah. Again, you can see a very playful facade, blocks, elements, brickwork as well, amenities in terms of the extruded balconies, but also the terraces upstairs, which are the duplexes as well. And this is the facade from, again, the main road, Peckham High Street. Again, the plot coverage is quite big for this side, and the plot ratio as well, but it's done in such a way that when you walk down the street, you actually don't feel the height in such a way. And yeah, that's the plan, showing the proposal with the back courtyard as well. Yeah, trying to bring that up again into our consciousness. Looking at the Aylsham Centre, what we have is actually a lot of quite wide blocks of flats that have central cores to maximize the number of units. So there are no see-through, let's say, units on themselves, and then there is very little green space in between. As you can see, there are mainly the roads servicing roads, and then there is the play area, which is a mandatory thing, and some greenery space. Yeah, and this is the aerial view showing the highest point up to 20-story high. You can see here, I think this shows very well this plot coverage and plot ratio diagram, just showing it's a very dense development, and it's something that doesn't fit the heritage in Peckham. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Eileen, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. Sorry, I was. Thank you very much, Siobhan, for noticing. I was just saying thank you very much, Andrea, for a very good overview, and for Benny for giving such an inspiring tour of some of the things that we really value, those of us who lived in Peckham, and that we think have important value for the future. Before we get into the general discussions, we've got room for 2 or 3 specific questions, one of which has come up already in the chat. So if anybody else has a specific question, which Benny or Andrea or I could answer, that's come up in what we've said so far, let's deal with it now, and then we'll get into the open session, where when you put your hand up, you can say whatever it is you want to say, whether it's a question, a comment, or anything. The first question is from Belinda, who says that she asks Benny what you meant by a taller building ventilating and aerating a site. Can you remember saying that?
Yeah, for whatever reason, the planners are fixed on this limit of 20 stories, I think because it matches Whitcomb Point. And because one of the things that's so conspicuously flawed, in my opinion, about this project is it's all kind of just let's see how much we can fit onto the site. Well, we get the fact that they want to make some money. They need to co-fund the affordable housing that's so keenly needed around here. But we think light and air and sun is important. And so perhaps if the tower was a bit taller, there could be less space in the middle of the site. And like we saw with the Goldsmith estate and with the Clifton estate, there's a lot of air and space for ventilation and sunlight. We think the current Aylsham proposal that's on the table now doesn't meet some of the minimum guidelines for daylight and sunlight. And so maybe a taller tower could open up the middle part of the site.
Okay, thank you very much, Benny. Ruth, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I have some comments, but I would have a question. I can't seem to put my camera on, but that wasn't the question. I don't think you covered, I think you must have done on previous things. What is the policy that it's working from? What does the London and Southwark policy say about what should happen on this site in terms of density and how it should be developed?
Well, I could answer that very briefly, if Benny wants to answer, but just very briefly, it says an indicative number of 850 housing units, and a number of other qualifications, especially about social housing. But the important and interesting thing to recognise is that in 2014, the council adopted the Peckham and Nunhead Area Action Plan, which indicated that the maximum housing units for that site would be 400. So sometime between around about 2016 and when the new Southwark plan got discussed at the examination in public, the number had miraculously doubled, and we haven't yet found out how and why that was justified, which actually we are investigating. It is just an indicative number. It is subject to all kinds of qualifications in a number of different planning policies in the new Southwark plan, which we're also examining now to show how probably that number, as you will have seen from what's being said tonight, doesn't really qualify and be compliant with the number of other things which are said about what should be done in terms of tall buildings and what should be done in terms of buildings that are so close to conservation areas. But that is all the work that is still going on to examine all that. I hope, Ruth, that responds to your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll come back to you in the comments. There's someone who put in a question on Twitter, which I wasn't able to write down before it disappeared, and I didn't catch the name. Is there somebody who would like to identify themselves as wanting to ask a question about Andrea's plot map diagram? Anybody like to identify themselves?
Hi, Eileen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, no, I've just been posting bits and pieces, and somebody's asked if Anthony Carpenter's asked if Andrea's written a paper on the plot height to plot ratio. If Andrea's done a paper on this, so you can answer that, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. No, actually, I have used that the diagram from the design coding illustration, National Model Design Code. So no, I haven't written a paper on that, but it's something I would be actually quite interested in taking maybe this research we've been discussing with Benny, starting from the open house for just to really understand the numbers in terms of density per hectare, the amount of units, the plot coverage and plot ratio, because I think that will give us some numbers that we could understand how other schemes in Southwark have been built, and they are not that far, and they are in let's say in situations where you don't have all this heritage richness around it. You just have the road, in a way, the four carriageway road, like Peckham High Street. And I think this is something I would be interested, but I haven't written that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I keep looking at exactly the same thing, and someone needs to do it.
Yes.
Thanks very much for raising those. We're having it. We've got a recording.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.
So we can actually take up some of these points afterwards. There's someone with a yellow hand up called admin. If you could tell us who you are and ask your. Oh, hi. Could you tell us who you are?
Yeah, hi, Cedric Wilby. Firstly, can I just say thank you, Benny and Andrea, for your presentation. Really insightful and helpful. But I was slightly sort of concerned with Benny's kind of presentation regarding the buildings that were built immediately after the war in terms of for residents. They were built very quickly, Benny. I don't know if you've ever been in one of those apartments or even lived in any of those apartments, but some of them, it was ironic that you used the word ventilating, because those apartments for some of our residents are very damp, very cold, and not very breathable. And they are affordable, and it's wrong that they should remain affordable in that for some of those residents, it's an eyesore, it's a pain. Also, I think it's important to remember that sometimes those heritage buildings of the past were built on some of the inhabitants in terms of enslaved communities across the nation, in terms of to kind of keep the Peckham gentrification going. And I suppose that heritage sometimes for people who look like me, walking along those buildings sometimes can be a pain, can be a trauma. But that's not what my conversation is, Benny, tonight. It's more about with Andrea. I mean, even though we talk about these examples that you've not given any cost in terms of the lower density of build, in terms of what that implication will be. Will it be sort of maintaining those communities that can afford to live in those types of less dense housing, or do we argue more with Barclays to say, look, if you're going to build more if you're going to build those kind of dense houses, let's ensure that it's homes that are going to deal with the 17,000 people that are on the council waiting list, or we build homes that are going to be more accessible and affordable to our community. Thank you.
Well, that's really helpful. What I would observe is the council holds all the cards in this. The planning committee will ultimately give consent or not to this project. And we ask them to make a better deal for Peckham, as they're the arbiters of this. And we think this, if you just look at this scheme, it's about how much money can we make. It's everything about it smacks of modern real estate capitalism. What can't we get Southwark to push harder for something that's better for Peckham?
Thanks very much, Benny. I'd like also to respond to Cedric's very important point, because I missed something out in my introduction, that tonight we're not dealing with all the issues that are raised by the Aylsham development plans from Berkeley, because they're being dealt with by the Aylsham Community Action Campaign. And a lot of work has gone on to looking, and is still going on, into looking at the housing provision. And certainly the Aylsham Community Action Campaign has agreed with just about anybody else who's been thinking about these developments in relation to housing issues in the borough, that the minimum social housing, not just affordable housing, but social housing that should be provided on a commercially owned site like this should be a minimum of 50%. At the moment, they are required to have a minimum of 25%, but the council's aim is to get developers to provide 50%. We think that the Barclays have never actually attempted to look at how they could provide a lot more social housing on the site. So all those issues are also being addressed, and very well made, because in the end, somebody, which will be the planning committee, will have to balance all these factors in terms of what the borough's needs are, what Peckham's needs are, and what the costs are, and what the developer can be persuaded to agree to modify the plans for. So that's very good. Now we've got more hands coming up. Katya?
Hi, everybody. My name is Katya. I'm based at Marmont Road, and this is my first time coming to one of the heritage meetings, so I'm very grateful to be here. The question I've got is, it applies, I think, just as much to from a kind of heritage perspective as it does to the work of the ACA. If I'm asking anything that's really basic, I'm very sorry, I'm still quite new to this. We're talking, I mean, Benny, you spoke a bit about getting a better deal for Peckham, and of course I'm fully on board with that. But one of the concerns I have with a group like the Berkeley Group, I get the sense that you give them, they seem to me utterly cynical, and the kinds of people where if you give them an inch, they take a mile. if we were able to get a so-called better deal with more affordable housing, something that is less dense, broadly what we're talking about, the specifics of it don't matter, but say they're able to wedge themselves in here and find they're not too obnoxious with the amount of sunlight and with how high up it is, but once they're in here, because they've admitted, but because they've admitted that basically they're building for people that are after second properties, my concern is once they are in here, do you think that there is a risk if we let them in and they go, okay, well, we just need to do this, that they build another dense thing, kind of another dense spot in a nearby car park? For example, there's one by Schumett Road or wherever another kind of cheap spot where they could set up basically would be. Is there a way of us, how do we address that concern? And if they are trying to, because this is all happening with the rapid gentrification of Peckham, who will be there to stop them? I'm afraid that long term they might build something and say, okay, we'll put a reasonable amount of stories in with the understanding that fine, in 10 years Peckham will look very different and we'll make it 20 stories, 30 stories, etc. So I hope I put that in a clear way, and if that's a silly question, I'm sorry, I'm brand new. Thanks very much.
Katia, I can make a very quick response to that. First of all, they can't build on the Schumett car park at the moment because it's not in the New Southwark plan. The way to prevent it from ever becoming a development site is for people like us who live in the area, who are willing to give some of our spare time to working together to keep an eye on all of this all the time. The Schumett Road car park has been defeated in terms of a development site 3 times by local action in the last 17 or 18 years. And so that's the answer to your question. It's quite brutal for people like us because we have to spend a lot of time monitoring what's happened. Andrea, I noticed that you had your yellow hand up and if you wanted to say something.
Yes, very briefly to Cedric's point about the cost of buildings, that this is something we haven't presented in the research, and point taken on board. This would be quite interesting to find out, maybe per square meter or per unit. However, I would like to bring this idea of the healthy places and the fact that currently there are over 870 units being proposed. That's over 2,000 people coming into Peckham from 2030 onwards. And I would just like to say, currently in the provision we are seeing in terms of land use and in terms of space standards of the buildings, they are not really fit for purpose for the long run. So whilst I agree this concept of, building more to have more social housing, and I think Eileen touched the point that we are not going to discuss the details of the application. We are here more to discuss the heritage and let's say the appearance of the buildings. I do think that we don't want to be building the slums of tomorrow, and there is something really, when you look at the plan, you just see, as Benny said, it's like a neoliberal scheme on steroids, because it is just trying to make the most of the space plan whilst not allowing any public realm, any generosity, any uses other than some retail or class E at the ground floor. So there are no GP centers, no nurseries, no school provisions. There is just residential and some food and beverage and some class E units, which we don't know what they are, and they are definitely not supporting the independent shops that are around. And yeah, this is something I'm very interested to also research a bit more about, this effect that such a development would have on the wider Peckham in terms of gentrification, but also in terms of other smaller businesses and homeowners.
And we lose the arcade too. To further answer Katya's point, the next development sites coming up are just to the south along Briards Road. Behind Copeland, there's a bus station, there's various low density things there. And so obviously super density on the Elsham site sets the tone for super density a bit further back. And so we need to be kind of mindful of this. Of course, Peckham Rise Station is right there. There's really good public transport there, but we think it needs to just be more humane. And it's not only the Berkeley Homes determination to show returns for their shareholders, but it's also the fact that Southwark Council just overnight doubled the allocation from 450 units to 850 units. And we think no one really looked at that. We thought there's some pressure coming from above, perhaps from the mayor's office or the senior planners at Southwark. And they said, oh, well, we could just double the Elsham site. But as we're finding, you just can't fit it on there. And someone needs to have really thought it through before putting that in black and white in the new Southwark plan, that you could fit 850 flats there. It just doesn't work. They're great high density developments in London. This isn't one of them. You need some sun and air, basically.
I'd like to respond to the question in the chat, which is about, does Southwark have the right to prevent people who live abroad from buying flats there? No, they don't. But they can make all kinds of conditions, which is referenced also in another comment question about Section 106. We haven't got to grips yet with thinking about all the lists of things that we should demand come into the discussions about Section 106. But they're almost certainly already still having conversations between Berkeley and the council officers on all of this. So if anybody has a particular interest in that and any time to spare, they should get in touch with us, because we need more help to do the kind of work that's necessary to keep looking at all of this. But somebody's also asked the question, I'm wondering what's the definition of heritage, and is it conflated with architecture and the image and understandings of the lived experiences of those who don't speak, and how this is understood beyond this room? This is a really excellent question in the context of this event, because that is precisely what Peckham Heritage has been set up to really push the boundaries of the common understanding of heritage. It's certainly not just about buildings and not just about architecture. It's about the lived experience of all the people living now, and the people who've gone before us, and the people who come after us. So Peckham's Heritage, the book that Peckham Heritage as a group published on the 1st of March this year, is entitled Peckham's Heritage, Past, Present and Future. And that's everything about the lived experience of human beings in a place and what they've left behind for those of us, for those who come after them, and those who come after everyone, whoever lives in a place. It doesn't mean to say there are specific aspects which have to be preserved, but we need to take a consideration of all those things, because they're part of our collective memory. And it's a very important point that Cedric, in his comment and question earlier, talked about. There are many different kinds of people now who live in Peckham, all with different kinds of memories and reflections, both about our experience now in Peckham and in the recent lived past, but also in more remote times in Peckham. And one of the things that Peckham Heritage is most focused on is how we can have a more widespread involvement in thinking about those issues as they relate to Peckham. So that's what Peckham Heritage, why I'm particularly sad that Claire Hegarty can't be here with us today, because she's a conservation architect, that's her profession. And she is really strong on this point and was a main figure in making sure that the book, which so many people contributed to, including Benny and Derek Kinraid, about the way in which our understanding of heritage doesn't need to be redefined, because that's the definition actually in the Heritage Lottery Fund, as we know well. So it's not something we have to redefine, but we have to reclaim it and widen the understanding of it. And this is why it's so important that we really say something very authoritative about the impact of this particular development on what is in fact not just Peckham High Street and those historic buildings, but the whole of Rye Lane and Peckham High Street, and the streets, the commercial streets leading off them, are part of the Peckham Rye Lane conservation area, and there is legislation protecting conservation areas. While that can be overridden, it needs to be taken properly into consideration, and we believe it has not been taken into proper consideration by the owners of this site and the instructions that they have given to their architects. So I can't recall now, because I haven't got a copy of it, the name of the person who put the question about heritage, but would you like to say something else about that in response to what I've just said?
Eileen, thank you very much. I'm Reverend Dean Pusey of St Mary Magdalene Church, recently appointed, and so I'm very curious as to what has been said tonight because the Elsham Centre is in my parish, in our parish of St Mary's. So therefore, we have skin in the game, so to speak. But I'm always left wondering about whose heritage are we speaking of, particularly those who do not feel that they are even seen. And I think sometimes functional definitions are really, really helpful. Cedric has offered one important aspect. Benedict, I know what you said about it, those buildings look wonderful, but when you live in them, and I lived in the Sumner estate that was pulled down, it's not so wonderful. And we must take into account some of those things, that what might be beautiful in the eye of a beholder of an architectural point of view, for me, living stones are people. And that's the key thing. How does this land with people? So I'm going to be very curious as to see where you go with this. I hope that
We've lost your sound. Can you?
we get beyond 40 people, and that those who do not feel they've got a voice to be heard. Thank you.
Well, what could you? I'm not. Can you tell us where your church is? I'm surprised that this is in your parish. Whereabouts is your church?
St Mary Magdalene Church.
Oh, it's the St Mary Magdalene Church, right? Well, could you? Well, we've got your email address, I imagine, because you've obviously registered with the Eventbrite. I think we'd like to take this up with you and talk to you about it, because that's one of the reasons that Peckham Heritage as a group has been set up, because we want to make sure that we do precisely what you're talking about. We're only interested in the community at large, in all its different aspects, being involved in these kinds of processes. That's our main reason for putting so much effort into what we're doing. So the dialogue, and why we had this event tonight, was to try to make contact with other people like yourselves who've got views about this, so that we could all engage in a conversation together about what we collectively mean by heritage in Peckham. So I'm very, very pleased, and I'm sure Claire will be too, and the rest of us, that you've raised these questions, because they're at the heart of what we're actually talking about.
Thank you, Eileen. I'm going to turn my camera off because of bandwidth. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else got? Oh yes, we got some. Stella, Ruth, I'll come back to you when the people who haven't spoken have a chance. Stella, could you unmute yourself and let us hear?
Sure, yeah, I'm just really interested in what Dean just said about, particularly about the Sumner, because it's one of the estates I've lived on in Peckham too. Before that, it was North Peckham Estate. And the point about blocks like, estates like the blocks that made up the Sumner Estate, is that they were human sized, and the way they were designed, again, they were around patches of grass and what have you. You could see other people, you could relate to them. Whereas just living in a great big high block, you're not going to get that at all. I guess it's inevitable, but it's sad.
Thanks very much, Stella. Ruth?
I'm on to comments now. Is that all right?
Yes, fine. Yeah.
I've got so many, but I'll try and say stop me when you want me to. So I'm a retired planner and an urban designer, so I can only comment as my own personal view now. Benny's talk was very interesting about the way back history of Peckham, especially as I came from there. But I don't think in reality that the people who make decisions today are going to give much strength to something that happened a long way back. I think some things might be able to, like the road layouts and the general form, but obviously it's totally unrealistic to expect it's going to be anything like what it was then, because everything else was different then. But the context is obviously helpful. But I think we should concentrate more on the things that others have been saying. This is what really matters. So I've written down a lot of things. The size of the flats that are proposed also affects it. Obviously a 3-bedroom flat is going to take up more actual floor area, and you could probably get 2 small 1-bedroom flats in the same space, bumping up the numbers still. So I don't know what the mix is, and I don't need to know, but I'm just saying as a comment, that affects the size, obviously, of the overall buildings, but still wouldn't penalise the number of units they want, if that could help. I think one of my most crucial things that I just object to is the general module and the scale, the grain, and so much of this big complex. Where else is there something like that except the big estate between Peckham and the Elephant that got removed because there was so much and it was so out of character, so out of scale, so unwieldy, so impersonal. It's very important to have everything broken up, and I can only really see they've done that in some nice colours and things. I think it needs an awful lot more than that. I think it needs differences in the roofscapes, for example. They're all these big blocks, big squarey rectangular blocks. And in terms of what was said about the plot ratios, even that low chunk, the low part, is higher than anything that's there at the moment. So that's quite a difficult. That's one reason why even that looks out of scale. Yeah, I've covered most of that. Needs a bit of brickwork, just brickwork, not cladding everywhere, and that can help. But I think we need to go back to the general thing about what is the architecture. And I think actually those people who don't speak, they might not know what to say anyway, but they do know how they feel when they walk along the street, and they do know what matters to them. And I think the idea of quite a good looking, grand, symmetrical building isn't probably what will be right for them. It's a building that fits with where they are used to living and what they're used to walking around, or is a better version of what they're walking around. I was also going to say, somebody mentioned in the chat that sometimes it doesn't work just saying, well, we're going to put some shops on the ground floor. They've got to be the right shops. They've got to be in the right place. They've got to be affordable, or else you might as well not bother. And they don't give that active street frontage and that thing that keeps the street active and alive and human scale again. It's no good having these big shop units with higher ceilings. That just could be a great big blank space if no one occupies them, and actually much worse than putting some flats down at street level. So I better stop now in case anyone else wants to say anything, but I'll come back if you want me to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And I think we'll be in touch with you, given that you've revealed that you're a planner. Cedric.
No, I just wanted to pick up on what Dan had said earlier, Dean has said, sorry, about heritage. And it is very complex. And what does it mean for all of us here? And, you know, in terms of what does heritage mean in Peckham? Because it has so many different interpretations and understanding. And I think sometimes we get like confused by this whole idea of heritage being buildings rather than its people, or it's the work or employment or the culture. You know, we seem to be kind of yet again dodging around what we're looking aesthetically rather than what we're looking at as a people. And I'm just still slightly cynical about that whole thing around heritage. It's not a very good description.
Well, if I could shed some light on that, one thing that's attractive about the historic buildings and the historic scene in Peckham is that they're beautifully detailed. Most of it. Look at Peckham Rise Station, for example. This fabulous stone, this lovely Suffolk white brickwork, or some of those pubs that have been fixed up on the high street under the THI program. They're really carefully thought out. They have things that architects don't work with anymore called style. Some of them are Gothic and some of them are classical. And so they're quite sophisticated architecturally. And so that's one of the joys of the heritage scene. I know, but that's only a tiny part of it. The other thing is, well, a lot of us are passionate about Peckham, and I like Peckham when I first moved here 25 years ago. What this scheme represents is a very different Peckham. And so if we like Peckham now, perhaps we should try to hang on to the things that we like about it, because this is a new Peckham that's being put forward, I guess.
Well, Benny, would you come, if you were to speak to yourself 25 years ago and you came today, would you not want to move into this place?
Not really.
No.
I-
And that's probably because it's changed. It is different. It isn't the same anymore. It's moved
Oh,
on.
I mean, I wouldn't want to move into the
I
new
think,
Elsham.
Benny, I mean, you said about the station. That station didn't consider people who may have mobility challenges. That train station didn't consider when it was being designed or built if you had had challenging in terms of sight problems or hearing problems, or it didn't consider any of that, Benny.
Yeah,
So
that's a
I'm
fact.
just saying to you that heritage at the time, those people who designed those buildings weren't considerate. They did it for themselves, selfishly, because it was the mood of the time. Today, I'm not saying I agree with the design or what's happening in Peckham. I totally agree. I totally I'm part of your tribe. I'm just saying I feel like we just need to kind of think very carefully about this term heritage. Whose heritage? Your heritage, but it's not my heritage. That heritage has clearly caused some real issues for some people in our communities.
Cedric, can I just say that the thing is that that's precisely what we set up Peckham Heritage for, because we want to get a wide collective understanding that we can all work in our different respective ideas about heritage. So we've already agreed with that, and that's what Peckham Heritage for. I hope that therefore you will consider joining our mailing list on Peckham Heritage. It's just getting off the ground because we've spent a lot of the time in the last 18 months finalising the book and launching the book, and also trying to work out what we think about and what we think the issues are in relation to the particular heritage in the centre of Peckham for this Ayrsham thing. And since we're all volunteers and there's only a small team of us, we haven't made much progress on that. So we do need to widen the net. And I'm very, very happy at the comments that have been made so far about the meaning of heritage, because that's precisely what we're actually working on. So yes, yes, and yes, I could say, and look forward to having more conversations about these issues. But Tanya has also come back with another point. Do you want to make, Tanya?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Can you see me?
No?
Oh, hang on. So yeah, I just wanted to reply to Cedric, and it's really interesting because the term heritage, as you say, means lots of different things to lots of different people, and I think that what you are saying is that heritage should not be exclusively defined as built heritage. And I think that if you look at Historic England wrote this publication called Conservation Principles, and it realised that what we protect at the moment in legislation is, with regard conservation areas, character and appearance. So it's what it looks like. With listed buildings, we protect the special architectural and historic interest. So it's all based on what it looks like. So what they have tried to do is to engage more widely with people who, I don't know, they've put a mosque when they arrived in England in a shop or a small room or something, to say that this is also heritage. It doesn't have to be the aesthetics. So they've come up with evidential value, historical value, aesthetic value, and communal value. So these are more intangible heritage. So I think I've thought a little bit about this, and we've had conversations about things like poetry. Is that heritage? How can we incorporate these things that you can't see? And I think they are different types of heritage. You're not going to see, when you walk down a street, the poem or the art exhibition that happened, for one day. But they are as important as the built heritage whilst discussions are going on, to inform what the built heritage of the future will be. But I think this is just my take on it, because I think I see what you're saying, is to do with the language behind this kind of thing. And, you know, all this heritage, the built heritage of all these, you know, we didn't live in that era. You know, we weren't born then. So it's just a really interesting discussion. I think, and I don't think it's an either or, it's a this and a that. That's all I wanted to say. Can't see you, Cedric, but yeah.
Thanks, Tanya. Andrea?
Yes, on Cedric's point as well, I was just going to say, if we extrapolate a bit, the facts are that the consultation from the developer side ended and the planning application in. So all this wealth of experiences from different groups of people that use Peckham, live in Peckham, has not been captured. And I know this is a heritage talk, but I just wanted to draw to everyone's attention that we are in a firefighting mode right now, and that exactly what we are talking in this talk and the discussions we are having are very nuanced and in a way just show our understanding of Peckham as people that have lived, shopped, used Peckham for many years. However, this is not something that is reflected in the current application. So I know there are some council consultation coming up soon. I don't remember the dates, but it's something that we should all get involved, just to express this wealth of richness, intangible and tangible, that is in Peckham, that hasn't been captured and hasn't been understood, you know, from the developer side, from their design team, how to respond to that, be it, you know, in a built way, be it in the public realm, be it in the greenery, be it, you know, in the land use proposition that they are allowing people to use it. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on the fact that it's nice to have this conversation, but I do feel we need to act on what we've said.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'd just like to point out to everyone that it's now just after 8:30, which is when we were formally closing, which I think we should do. We've already 5 or 6 people have left, and we just want to make formal closing, but we're not closing the Zoom. So those who can and wish to stay to continue this conversation for a little while, please stay. I just want to pick up the point that Andrea has mentioned about the council, at the urging of ACA, has established 3 drop-ins in the next few weeks, and they're on the Friday the 22nd, Saturday the 23rd, and Monday the 25th of November. In the first one is in Peckham Library, the second one is in Nunhead Library, and the third one is in All Saints Church in Blenheim Grove, at slightly different times. One's over lunchtime and the other's start in the afternoon, and one at least goes on till 7. So they have listened to us in this, because we know from all the work that we've done in and around Peckham that the vast majority of people have no idea that there's even a proposal, never mind a planning application and all the issues that go with it. So we know that there's still a significant amount of work that needs to be done to reach people who can contribute to the kinds of things that we've been talking about tonight, which I'm hoping that now that we've made contact with the Vicar of St. Mary's, right in the so close to the site, we might be able to do something with that church in trying to get the message across to people who have maybe not heard about it, and certainly probably not heard about this Zoom event. But in any case, the Zoom event tonight is very special because it's specifically about heritage, which has had very little attention until now in all the work that we've done. And there's a lot of work going on in terms of housing. And to answer one of the points that was made at some point, one of the policies that the plans currently are not compliant with, which is a definite reason for rejecting a planning application, though not necessarily on its own, is that it doesn't provide as much family housing as the Southwark plan says it should provide. So there are a number of details like that that still need to be identified and tracked down, and we hope that we've got enough time to do it. But I'm going to give Benny a chance just to say a few words after me, and then we'll close the meeting formally, and those who wish to can stay on, and we can have an informal conversation about whatever anybody wants to talk about in relation to the topics tonight. Benny, would you like to say something? I want to say thank you on my behalf and on everybody's behalf at a very stimulating and informative presentation. Thank you. And Andrea too, sorry.
All I would add is I think we've been stitched up by the council on this super dense allocation of the site, which no matter how fabulous the designers were, can't make something that's nuanced and is architecture. It's just super dense. And so it could be so much better. There's so much amazing stuff happening in London. Why can't this project be something other than a cartoon for overdevelopment?
Well, thank you very much, Benny. That's a good way to end this more formal part of it. So everybody, there are 1 or 2 yellow hands clapping I've seen on the screen. So let's all do that anyway. Yellow hands and claps. And you can unmute yourself and then we can actually hear your claps. And you can all unmute yourself now, by the way, if you wish, and say what you want to say. Lots of yellow clapping. Thank you very much.
Eileen,
Thumbs
can I
up.
just put a plug in for ACA? We have an in-person meeting this Thursday,
Yes, do
starting at
be sure.
6:30 at the Peckham levels. And what we're going to do is walk through how to put an objection in or comment in through the planning portal on this application. So if you're interested in looking into that, please come along. But also part of the session is going to be locals talking to locals about what should form their objections. I think a lot of people have ideas and how to get that across, in the space. So yeah, come along, all welcome.
Well, thank you, Siobhan, because I've also remembered that, first of all, we didn't say how people could get the information about all the events that are coming up in November, both the details about the council events and also the details and how to sign up for the meeting on Thursday. Could you just explain how people can get at that, the link tree and stuff?
Yeah, what I can do is I can send an email after this with all the events listed, so everyone's got it on an email.
Excellent. And so everybody, the Ayrsham Community Action Campaign is a sort of umbrella. Two groups have been involved in it from the beginning because they co-founded it, and that's Peckham Vision and Peckham Heritage. But there's also lots of individuals who aren't parts of any groups. So it's a sort of an umbrella, but the only 2 organised groups that are part of it are Peckham Vision and Peckham Heritage because we've been involved from the beginning. But anybody who supports the objectives of the campaign, which is to get a good plan for this site and that we have means of connecting with a wide representation of the diverse demography in Peckham. That's what we're really after, and that it benefits Peckham. So in the email it goes around to everybody, and so as a result of that you will also be put on the ACA mailing list and also on the Peckham Heritage mailing list. If you don't want to be on either of those lists, just please respond saying you don't want to be. But this is one of the ways that we can help to continue to make a connection. Now, does anybody else would like to say anything about anything? Please say something so that we have some conversation.
Eileen, I have to go, but thank you for the invitation. It was a really stimulating and insightful conversation. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Cedric, for your contributions.
Our paths will all cross again quite soon.
I'm sure they will. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Anyone else?
I'm done. Bye for now, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Belinda. Bye.
Hi, Eileen. It's Tendai here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, hi, Tendai.
Hi there. How are you?
Okay.
Thank you for this. This has been really, really insightful and much needed. I was the person that brought up the Section 106 question, and you said, yeah, this is a much needed discussion that needs to be had. Do you have anything in the pipeline for us to brainstorm?
Can you come to the meeting on Thursday at Peckham Levels at 7 o'clock?
It's Thursday. Let me double check 1 second.
So on Thursday, the Peckham Levels meeting, we gather from 6:30 to 7, so we can have informal conversations and answer questions like this.
Hour. Cool. Just half an hour, yeah?
Well, no. Well, you can come then. But the evening is 6:30 to 7, informal, and then 7 to 8 we have a formal process, and then people stay around afterwards to have conversations a bit like we're having now. Do you think you can come? Because I think we could actually perhaps have a conversation about 106 there.
Yeah. It's actually free in my diary. So yes, all right, I'll put that in my diary
That would
now
be
from
great. We'll
6:30.
see you on Thursday then, Tendai. Thank you.
All right then, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Eileen, can I just make a comment? I just wondered if anyone had come up with an alternative scheme, because I remember, I know a couple of you on this call, especially Benny. I'm a great fan of Create Streets, and what they have done is they have come up with alternative schemes for lots of things they don't like. So I just wondered if anyone had tried that, because I'm a conservation officer, so I'm the kind of person that will be looking at these applications from the other side and making decisions. And what I notice is, and I'm sure you all know this, Benny knows this, you know this, Eileen, but sometimes it's helpful to say what you do want rather than what you don't want, because something is going to go there, and if there's not an alternative, that will be built. It might take 1 year, it might take 2 years, it might take 5 years, it might take 10 years, and then the numbers will go up because they will have spent more. So that was the only thing I was going to say. And I'm sorry I can't dedicate more time to this as much as I'd like to, but it just might be an exercise for someone or a group of people to come up with an alternative.
That's what we would have liked for some time, but yes, a group hasn't emerged. That's the problem. But we do have some people around who might be able to get their act together. I've been wondering whether, in fact, it might be useful to have a Zoom session like this. We couldn't do it before January now, but for people who are interested in all the design aspects of the plan, to share their understanding, their knowledge so far. And perhaps that's another aspect that we could look at in such a Zoom session, which is what would be the ingredients of an alternative. Do you think that might actually help to bring together a small group of people who might be able to devote some effort to it?
Unfortunately, I can't at the moment. I've just got too much on my plate. But I am sure if I had more time and there were this opportunity, I think what would be nice is if there are, like Benny, Andrea, I think you're an architect, Andrea, as well, could come up with some ideas. I'm not an architect, but I've come up with some ideas for things. But I think what's important in this is that you work out, it's a number crunching issue, and how many flats, houses, etc. there are, what the square meterage is, what the plot coverage is, or whatever it is now, and then without looking at those designs, work out how you could tick all those boxes to a degree that will give you a development that is much more attractive. So less houses or flats or apartments maybe, but maybe you could have the same number, more 1-bedroom flats or more 2-bedroom flats. I don't know. You'd have to really think about who's going to live there, who can afford to live there, how much social housing there is, all of those kind of issues that you guys are trying to sort out. But it needs someone with a head for figures to say, right, we need to do this, 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 and this, and this. And then another group of people say, this is what the people here want. And another group of people say, who can afford what? So, I do think, and Andrea's plot ratio issue it needs to be discussed, definitely. So yes, I think that would be a good idea, and there must be people in your orbit who would do that.
Well, so that's one of the things that we'll definitely think about, which is has anybody got the capacity to put on a Zoom session which is very specifically focused on all the design issues, of which some of the ones that part of it is what you just talked about, but of course there are other design issues as well that really do need to be examined and scrutinized. Thank you, Tanya, for your comments. Andrew, did you indicate you want to say something?
Not this time, no.
No, okay.
Eileen,
yes,
can I
Dean?
just say something? I grew up in Peckham, very quickly. We lived in Woking, and we saw the transformation of Woking in 2 decades. I don't know whether anyone's ever been to Woking and seen the transformation of what they did, but it was one of the most interesting things I've seen. And I would just say that the heart of Woking's old high street has now gone. I'm just saying there's an implication that you may lose Rye Lane. The issue is once the Elsham Centre, and that you're going to balance some really hard economics, if you want shops underneath that development or shops there, what impact that's going to have on Rye Lane itself.
Dean,
That's
Dean, can I, Dean, the plans do, the whole of the ground floor is commercial.
I understand that, but that will, because of competing demands and having seen what happened in Woking, I would strongly suggest that you might just want to just go down. I know it's Surrey, I know it's leafy Surrey, but have a look at what they did. And
Is it good or bad that you're talking about?
I suggest people need to look, because I don't want to tarnish anyone. I'd like them to have a look and ask questions. That whole place in Woking was transformed in a 20-year period.
Well, if what you're saying is that it's possible that this development might ruin the current economy of the town centre, that's an issue that we're already investigating.
Well, Woking is bankrupt as a local authority as a result. So I would just.
I don't think we actually, but it's great to have that evidence. But we're definitely onto this point, Dean, and I look forward to talking to you about it.
Eileen, just give me an email, and if I can, on Fridays I'm not available, but if you want to have a conversation, please do contact me at some.
I will. We'll definitely pick this point up, Dean. Thank
you, Benedict, as well, and everybody, Andrea. The footprint is really, really important. I've seen Aldershot also go through the same developers. Developers are a law unto themselves. It's going to be a massive, humongous battle. That's all I'm going to say, having lived in 2 other places before Peckham again. And I just think we'd be just worthwhile asking people's experience of what did they go through to get to where they got to. I'm going to shut up now.
Maybe Peckham's the place where we might draw a line in the sand on this ludicrous thing that's going on throughout.
It's going to be very difficult with Canary Wharf and also the City of London just close by.
Well, we'll see. Michelle, you've got your hand up, and then Andrea. Thank you, Dean.
Hi, can you hear me?
Can you raise your volume a bit?
Can you hear me a bit better?
Yeah.
Sorry. In response to Tanya's comment about looking at alternatives, I think some of us did do that. I mean, I'm another architect, and a few months back, particularly also with another architect on a WhatsApp group, the ACA WhatsApp group, really intriguing and interesting forms of design that could accommodate higher density housing. And the problem is, as a lot of us know already, is the sheer amount of flats that Berkeley want to shoehorn into the site. If that was lowered, you could make it look more attractive and lower rise. But it's just the best architect in the world cannot make it look appropriate or good or contextual unless the numbers come down. And I know I've tried to do towers in Croydon, for example, which is a lot more built up in the town centre. And even there, it's really impossible. Once that developer gives you that quota of homes, you can't make it look elegant, no matter how hard you try. So it's really the density that needs to come down in a nutshell. And it's almost not the architect's fault, because they have to try and make it look elegant, and and it's really, really impossible. However, the architects could alter the materials that they're using, which could be more in context, which they haven't.
Thanks very much.
Can I just respond to that, Michelle Shelley? Are you Michelle Shelley? I think what you said is completely correct. And this is what I was sort of saying to Eileen earlier, that if you guys can come up with something gorgeous with less, they might just say, all right, look, let's just do that, because we're really not going to spend another 10 years fighting the local good folk of Peckham. So who knows? Might be worth a try. Why not?
Totally agree with you, Tanya. Just a question of whether it's possible for us to do it. Andrea.
Very briefly on Dean's point, I was going to say it's something I'm interested as well, and if time would allow, there is this policy in the London plan called Agent of Change that is looking at soundproofing, like mainly local clubs have been suffering from that when new developments are being built next to music venues or nightclubs or so on, that slowly they are having to shut down and being pushed further and further away. And I do believe just by empirical evidence, you know, just from my time living in London and moving around Southwark, that a lot of these places, once they are demolished and new buildings are being built, they do push this agent of change, i.e. Rye Lane will change completely. And I agree with your point, Dean. It will, all the traders and all the shops that we value, all the diversity will be pushed away. And I think this is something, you know, if there would be time and resources, could be explored just by looking in Southwark, like Elephant Park, for example, how that has changed completely the community from what it was before, with the Haygate estate and all the local shops. If you look at the current footprint, all the shops proposed are like very big units, which clearly don't accommodate for independent shops. So that will change a lot like the components of Rye Lane. So I agree, it's a very good point, and it's something that needs a lot more, let's say, a lot more eyes and brains to look at that, because the effect will be very big.
Okay, that looks like the end of the yellow hands, folk. Is there anybody else who would like to say something of any sort before we say goodbye to each other?
Can I
Yes,
be
thank
heard?
you, guys.
Can I be
Thank you,
heard?
everybody, for coming. Thank you. It was wonderful. Wonderful.
Robert
Yes,
says he
Robert.
wants to be heard.
Can I be heard?
You
Yes.
can.
Yes.
Ah, good, because I couldn't find the yellow hand thing.
At the bottom, the bottom. But anyway, speak your mind, Bobby.
But the project is so ugly for me personally. But are we assuming this is going to be, or is it going to be all residential for individuals and families and whatnot?
The rules are that they need to provide an X%, which I think is 40%, has to be family housing. There has to be a proportion, which is a minimum of about 35% of so-called affordable, of which only 25% will actually be affordable. One of the blocks is destined for non-residential but workspaces, a bit like the Bussey Building and Peckham Place. Not Peckham Place, Peckham Levels. What was the other question that you had about what? So it's a mixture and commercial all on the ground floor. I mean, commercial shops, but if we have a design session, we'll also have information available about that, about what is the design of the ground floor. I had a feeling that it was going to be designed so that it would be very flexible in terms of the size of units that could be accommodated, but we need to look into all of that. So it's not all residential. It's all residential except for one block above the ground floor.
Right. Okay. And the thing about residential blocks, we see it all over London, is that individuals and families have stuff that they stash away here and there, but so often you see the outside of the residential blocks, little balconies just stuffed with all sorts of things, washing, bikes, all sorts of paraphernalia, which just negates the aesthetics of the building. So that's just a point I want to make.
Well, it's another aspect that needs to be looked at in terms of the design. If we can get a few people together who know about architecture and buildings and design, we can have a list of questions for them to investigate, to give us the responses to all of this. So it's a point that some of us are already concerned about. There's all kinds of things about the detailed design, which we haven't had time to look at yet. Anybody else got anything else to say? And what we're going to be doing is sending out Siobhan will send out a catch-up sort of roundup email afterwards with various bits of information that we couldn't really give in detail, and in any case have links to them for more detail. So with that, folks, thank you very much, everybody who's made a contribution, and for Benny, Andrea and Siobhan for working with me to make sure this happens and happens without upset. I think we managed to get through it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much, everyone. Take
Thanks,
care.
Eileen.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everybody.
much, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.